On behalf of Hong Kong University Press, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our most esteemed guests, as well as everyone who's taken the time out of a very busy schedule to join us here today at Hong Kong Maritime Museum. For the past 70 years, Hong Kong University Press has endeavored to publish work of the highest academic and research standards. Our publications aim not only to serve the scholarly community, but to also contribute educational, social, and cultural value to society as a whole. Today, we are very delighted to discuss our latest title, CY Tongue and the Rise of Modern Chinese Shipping, which you can see here. The book explores the remarkable life and career of CY Tongue, one of the most influential figures in 20th century maritime history. More than a biography, it traces the transformation of the shipping industry during a period of unprecedented changes and examines how Hong Kong emerges as a vital center for global maritime enterprises. Through CY Tongue's vision, ambition, and entrepreneurial spirit, we gain a unique insight into the development of modern Chinese shipping and Hong Kong's places in the global economy. We are very honored to have with us today Professor Howard Dick, who is one of the authors of the book. Professor Dick is an honorary professorial fellow in the Department of Management and Marketing at the University of Melbourne, Australia. And he also specializes in the economic and business history of East Asia. We would also like to acknowledge the valuable contribution of co-author Stephen Kenwell, even though he unfortunately is unable to join us here today. We are deeply, deeply grateful for his work and effort on this project. In conversation with Professor Dick is Professor Christine Low. She is Chief Development Strategist at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. She is also a former legislator and Undersecretary for the Environment and a current board member of the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. Please join me in first welcoming Professor Dick.
Well, thank you all so much for coming. From the people I know already, there is an amazing amount of knowledge and experience in this room. So it is a privilege to be here. And I do apologize for my co-author Stephen. Until a week ago, he was intending to come here and prepared everything, but he had medical advice. He had an open heart surgery several months ago, and although he's recovering well, it just seemed the advice was he would be unwise. So I said, your health is paramount. I want you to live for a long time and let me do what I can. So I'm here in the plural. Please allow that whatever I say, I speak for both of us. We are also honored that the family are represented from Chichen and Harriet especially, but also related family, David Koo, William Tung, and Stephen and Roger and Stephen Peter. So this makes it very much a family occasion. I'd also like to say that, speaking for us both, that it's wonderful to be here at the Hong Kong Maritime Museum. Stephen and I first visited many years ago at Stanley, and you will remember where it all started, met with Stephen Davis for the first time in those days, and subsequently when we moved here to Star Ferry, because this is one of the great maritime museums of the world, with the particular strength that it speaks to the practical side of the shipping industry, not just related matters. I think as the ships disappear, become less visible in the ports of the world, it is more and more important that the maritime industry explains itself so that it can continue to attract the best and the brightest and the most energetic people. I think that would be a common cause that we all have. So we're going to do some time travel today. I've got myself ready for that by traveling on the Star Ferry this morning, and that certainly takes me back in time. Where we are now, this will be familiar to you, but it just makes the obvious point that the combined merchant fleets under the Chinese flags, even leaving aside Singapore, are more than a fifth of all the shipping of the world. And that is an extraordinary thing, because when CY was born in Shanghai in 2012, just the year after the revolution, the downfall of the Qing dynasty, that was inconceivable. It was inconceivable in 1945. And when I was growing up in Melbourne in the 1960s, and when we first came to Hong Kong and Singapore, the shipping in the harbour was primarily British or Japanese, and of course there was a certain amount of European tonnage and so on, but there was not much Chinese tonnage in the 1960s. So we're looking at a revolution that has occurred in a very short time, actually, something like about 60 years in my lifetime. And the question, therefore, is, how did that happen? Now, here are the contents of the book. In essence, we frame it by China's history. It will be familiar to all of you here. I'm not going to go into any detail on that. The core of the book, however, is the business biography of CY Tung. We look to try and understand his role in this extraordinary revolution that has lifted China's merchant fleet from very, very little to now being the dominant force in world shipping. I'm not going to go into too much detail on CY's life. It's in the book, but let us just note that he received an Chinese and English language education in Shanghai, the Anglo-Chinese school. So English, it was something he had from his youth. He then went off and took an apprenticeship with a Japanese firm and learned Japanese, which also proved invaluable to him. And in 1931, he went to Tianjin, and that became very significant because that's where C.S. Good took him under his wing and made the suggestion that perhaps this very promising young man might like to marry his daughter, Prudence Ching, which did indeed happen in 1932 and brought these two families together. So at that point, CY starts to become involved in shipping, not only in the Tianjin Navigation Company, but also the secretary of the Tianjin Shipowners Association. Now I'm going to jump a little bit through the war years, but we more or less start the story here in Hong Kong. That's Hong Kong in 1946. There's not much happening yet. The recovery hasn't yet really begun. But Island Navigation Company already exists. It was created in 1940 during the Sino-Japanese War as a way to keep some shipping going under flags of convenience. And one ship actually survived the war. Well, as it became very well known to David here, I'm sure, this was CY and Associates' first ship in 1940. As I said, we're going to begin post-war. So let's start in 1948, which also happens to be the year in which I was born. Rather amazing, isn't it? So here is CY on a ship. It's actually the Queen Elizabeth, which he would later buy, on his way from New York to Southampton. On the other side, thank you. Okay. On the other side are the ships, the first ships that he bought after the war. He, through an entity called the Chinese Maritime Trust. Now, there was an idea that was floated when he was secretary of the Shenzhen Shipowners Association. His argument was, let the Chinese coastal shipowners combine with each other to give strength in competing with the big foreign firms, Jardine, Swire, and Nishin. It didn't actually happen. There was not much support from the Kuomintang government, but he did manage to link a few Chinese shipowners together at that time, and also establish the Chinese Maritime Trust in Hong Kong. After the war, that entity, Chinese Maritime Trust, was the way that he could raise some funds, bring some capital together to buy a fleet of second-hand ships. My apologies if the sound is not working well. By a fleet of second-hand ships that would earn some money. So it was, that brings us through to 1949 and the post-war era. As you know, despite all of his efforts to go international, to try and re-establish himself in Shanghai, in the end, it was simply impossible. The Chinese Revolution made it too uncertain as a business environment. So along with many others, in May 1949, he moved to Hong Kong and tried to re-establish. But part of the fleet and most of the Chinese Maritime Trust fleet moved across to registration in Keelung. And so there was a split at that point, a geographical split in business. Now, why is this photo here of a Liberty ship called the Ching Yung? Well, it's the first ship of C.Y. Tung's that I ever saw. It's taken in Melbourne in 1965 when it was bringing in timber from Vancouver. And I had no idea when I took this photograph who owned it. But it's rather remarkable historically that was the first connection for me. Because that's the kind of ship that got CY started, as many, many other Hong Kong companies, benefiting from the Korean War boom, carrying cargoes, mainly iron ore, coal, other such low-value goods, ships that were very low capital costs, Chinese crew, flags of convenience, bottom of the market. The bottom of the market was not where CY intended to stay, and before very long, he was building new ships. He ordered his first new ship in France in 1955, and very soon, with that first ship onwards, he was building new bulk carriers. He tried to go into tankers. He could see Onassis and Yakos were doing that and thought there was potential. In fact, it didn't work out very well for the first few years, so he converted the tankers back to bulk carriers and chartered them to US Steel, Navios, and that became quite profitable. So he was a little bit ahead of YK Powell and the other Hong Kong Shipowner owners in going into bulk carriers and tankers and new vessels, but then being on the technological frontier. And eventually, he's building larger and larger tankers. So here we are, Orient Giant, a ship of which he was
very proud, and CC remembers very well also. 70,000 tons. Eventually, of course, he would build the largest tanker in the world, 500,000 tons. But the really interesting part of the story that I want to concentrate on today is the liner shipping. Because up to this point, up to 1961, what CY was doing was not so different from what other Hong Kong owners were doing in the bulk and tanker trades. In 1961, he started to fulfill his dream. His dream had always been to break into liner shipping. He wanted the Chinese flag to be on the world's oceans carrying general cargo, because that was the prestige side of the business, but a great deal more difficult than bulk shipping. With bulk shipping, you make the charter, you carry one cargo from A to B, and you hope all goes well. But with liner shipping, you have many ports. Of course, the multiplicity of cargoes. You need agents all around the world, and many, many things can go wrong. I had some very good friend in Australia for many years who worked with a shipping company, and he would be inclined to say, in shipping, everything can go wrong, and it probably will. That's a very good industry for a pessimist. Anyway, the problem CY had was, of course, he didn't have enough money. He was starting to get loans, bank loans, but the banks, although happy to lend for bulk shipping and tanker shipping, were not so keen to lend for liner shipping, which was a less profitable and more problematic business. So he was really going against the grain here. He was fulfilling an ambition rather than doing something which was going to make him more money. But he did the best he could. He built some very fine new ships. Yung was one of the best, and Orient Queen was in many ways a path-breaking conventional cargo liner, one of the best of the last of that kind of vessel, and CC can tell some stories about how that ship was designed. So he was on the technological frontier, but primarily to maintain frequency, he needed more ships. So he bought cheap second-hand ships, Victory ships particularly, and we'll see some more of those in a moment. He also bought a lot of passenger liners. The one Oriental Lady on the left was for the Trans-Pacific liner trade, a class of 6 that were built for Hapag, the German owners. They were prepared to sell in the late 60s, and so suddenly CY, after some tough negotiation, had 6 fine ships to put in the Trans-Pacific trade, carrying cargo, but also a limited number of passengers. And he bought bigger and bigger ships. Here on the other side, you have the President Wilson and her sister, the President Cleveland. Again, he had traveled on those from Shanghai to San Francisco in 1948. He traveled on the ship, and then he would buy it. Now, these ships were not, I emphasize, the liners especially, were not a way to make money. Perhaps he broke even. I don't know the figures, but certainly this was not a profit-making venture. And we know that on occasion, CH, my apologies, was saying, please don't buy that ship. There was one example in here. He said, I might buy that. No, don't go to the scrapyard. Call in at Hong Kong. I want to inspect the ship. And I said, no, CH, sorry. Please don't. Eventually the report came in and he decided, no, it's not in a good condition to do that. But this was his enthusiasm for beautiful ships. But there was one other reason for doing it, and that is it did provide wonderful publicity for Orient Overseas Line at this time, free container ships, because you saw these beautiful liners in ports all around the world. They were in around the world service, and suddenly people noticed Orient Overseas Line. and they start to become curious. So that's happening in the background. But then in 1969, CY's been looking. He's always looking ahead. What's the next thing? And he realizes that containerization is starting to happen. The British lines, particularly, and the European lines, are ordering new ships to containerize the main liner trades to Australia and also to the Far East. And if he doesn't do something, all the work he's put in to building these conventional liner trades, it's all going to be for nothing. It's going to disappear. He could see that. So he had to do something without much money to do it. So what's the solution? Well, he runs a considerable fleet of these old Liberty ships. Victory ships. They're quite fast. American-built 15, 16-knot cargo liners. But his wonderful idea was that I will take off all the cargo gear and they can carry containers on deck. So that's towards the end as a conventional cargo carrier. The first one was, that's as a Belgian flagship, and then he buys it for Orient Overseas Line. Then he takes off all the cargo gear, and you can do a 3-high stack of containers on deck. Yeah, and then you can just see here, this is a very interesting slide. So here's the hatch cover, and he's built on the side supports for the container stacks. How many would that ship carry on deck? 350 containers. Now that is barely registers on the scale nowadays when ships are carrying more than 20,000 containers. But at the time, it was a cheap way of getting into the market, giving a weekly frequency across the Pacific, and doing it at a fraction of the cost that it was costing OOCL and the British and the European lines. So he got into the market as a pioneer, the first container line out of Hong Kong, and he was already in the market ahead of even the established European lines. Now that is so audacious, so visionary, that I can hardly overemphasize that, and such an extraordinary risk, a very calculated, cautious risk. He wasn't gambling. He thought it through. He got the best advice he could from people like Maxon Lines that knew about container shipping and were already there. But he wasn't going to stop with these converted Victory ships. There's a couple of them during a strike in San Francisco Harbor. He was going to go ahead and order a fleet of new ships, which he proceeded to do in European yards, France, Italy, this one here, China Container, built in Taiwan. The problem was he couldn't afford to run them under what was now Orient Overseas Container Line because they were just too expensive. But so he had to charter some of them out for a few years. But by 1980, he was established, Orient Overseas Container Line was established as a lead and frontline operator on board shipping routes. And let me say here, it's pointed out in the book, that although we're mentioning CY, in point of fact, it was C8 and CC who were driving much of this business. And he was very wise in thinking, well, my sons, they can build this business, and they did so with great success and initiative in the face of enormous difficulties. Now, that's all I'm going to say about the business and at this stage. We then would come in chapter 10 of the book to considering CY his life and his legacy. In retrospect, he died, as we know, tragically of a heart attack in April 1982, very suddenly and unexpectedly. But his two sons were already, CH and CC were already running a good part of the business, and they were ready to take over. So OOCL, the legacy of OOCL is still with us today. The company still exists, the ships are still trading, and the containers and that famous Meiwa logo is still to be seen widely around the world. Now, of course, since 2017, it has been owned by COSCO, but it is still an independent Hong Kong entity. And Island Navigation also still exists, and both companies in their offices on the waterfront here in Hong Kong, very far away from here. Now, the last chapter of the book, we go back to a broader view. So let me just make a few concluding comments on that. On the one hand, we try to explain the emergence of what we can call a PRC fleet from having been completely confined to domestic waters until well into the 1960s, China being the outstanding flag of inconvenience. But now, of course, we have the very rapid emergence of these enormous giant companies in COSCO and China Merchants, of course, with a very long history back to 1872, 73, and others such as China State Shipbuilding, and not only in all forms of shipping and ports and shipbuilding, the dominance of China's state enterprises can hardly be overestimated. So the question then, of course, as you all know better than I do, is, well, that presents challenges for family-based shipping businesses, whether in Hong Kong or in Taiwan. And so what I'm fascinated to observe, and we give some other examples in the chapter, but it's only very selective. Of course, Sandy knows far more about all of this than I do, but we do refer to these family shipping businesses as being agile shapeshifters. Let me show that on the slide. Finding market niches for enough time to sustain that family business into what is already third, fourth, and hopefully fifth generations. The wonderful book of Stephanie Zaraks that was published some years ago for I think the 60th anniversary of the Hong Kong Shipowners Association does go into considerable detail on these family companies, and Sandy tells me there's going to be another one very, very soon to celebrate the 70 years. So I look in from the outside, and I'm extraordinarily impressed by the agility and the cautious risk-taking that many of you here in this room continue to do. So that's, I think that the two of us have done the best we can as two Guelo from Australia. I'm going to end with just an advertisement, if I can do that. Stephen and I also run this website, allchinaships.com, and if you haven't seen it already, please go and have a look. What we've tried to do here over many, many years, the website itself has probably been going for about 15 years. We first published in 1973 this little red book, Far Eastern Fleets, and that was really the start of everything, because Stephen had his chapter on the Tung group and its fleet, but we also had Swire and Jardines and others in there as well. Well, that has become All China Ships, and what we're trying to do, certainly for the pre-war tonnage and some of the post-war companies is not only to say this is the fleet, these are the ships, but as far as possible also provide a photo of the ship. So that if anyone is interested, well, what's that ship? There is the story of the ship, and there is a photo of it. And it's putting together a jigsaw puzzle. As I say, we're still a bit selective on the post-war fleets, but I hope that you may find some of it of interest, and it's there in the public domain to encourage anybody who can use that material to write some history of their own company or their own family or whatever it might be. So enough from me. Let us hand over to the boss.
Thank you, Professor Dick, for the very in-depth and interesting sharing. And now we're with Professor Lowe at Niles will join in conversation with Professor Dick to discuss more in-depth. So please also welcome Professor Lowe.
Well, thank you so much. We had a session yesterday at the book fair. So I went to and listened to that as well. The two talks are slightly different, but both equally fascinating. And as moderator, the privilege is I get a free book. But what I have to do is read it so that I can come and do a reasonable job. And I have to say, it's a fascinating book. But the other thing, really, Howard, is so important is actually the website. I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're interested in shipping or not. I do recommend that all of us who have connections with China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, really look at it. And I think Mr. Su yesterday said that he found his family ship on it. He'd been looking for it all his life. So it really is an amazing archive. Now, listening to you twice, I've got kind of 4 areas that I thought we could explore that we didn't have enough time to explore yesterday. So there's obviously the protagonist, the chief protagonist, Mr. Tung. And you could, I guess, look at his life post coming to Hong Kong in like 3 decades, right? The early years of coming to Hong Kong, quite a troubled time in China itself. And I guess the people who came from Shanghai to Hong Kong, they really weren't sure whether they would go back. It was and then obviously sitting in Hong Kong, you kind of watch the disintegration of commerce and so on. And, the identity of the ROC, the PRC, Hong Kong, British Hong Kong, that has always been a fascinating part of Hong Kong's history. So in that first decade, what more can you tell us about the shipowners, Mr. Tung and others, right, who came to Hong Kong and had to restart their business? And you reminded us just now that CY didn't really have much money. So tell us a little bit more about how he navigated this quite ambiguous and contested situation being in Hong Kong.
That's a very broad question and not an easy one to answer. One of the comments I made yesterday was that CY was a reluctant shipowner, and that was true, I would say, of a number of others. T.Y. Chow, for example, as my memory is, he got a university degree as a lawyer, one of the founders of HKU, and a university degree in chemistry, I think. So I suspect that if it had not been for the revolution, Pao probably would have become a banker rather than a ship owner. So for quite a few of these people, they did it because they needed to have some way to support the family. And ship owning was a pathway that could work in Hong Kong. There was, of course, we did become factory owners or pursue other activities. For CY, I guess by the time the war came, it was pretty clear that he was going to get involved in shipping, but it wasn't bulk shipping that interested him. He wanted to be a liner ship owner. He wanted to run cargo liners and passenger liners that could compete with the, shall we say, the imperial shipping lines. So, but on the whole, the Hong Kong owners took the somewhat safer route of bulk shipping and tanker shipping, and that was such a good opportunity because you could ride the Japan boom. So once the Shikuisen arrangements became possible, then you could create something out of nothing because obviously banks would then lend you money. The problem, as I said, is banks necessarily will not lend you money for liner shipping. So it was the difficulty of that transition, but the Korean War certainly helped. But one other thing that Stephanie Zarak refers to, of course, in that wonderful book of hers on the Hong Kong Shipowners Association, that through the 1950s, many anyway of those companies were not flying their own house flags by any means. Their ships were trading as Wallens or Wheelock Marden or Mollers. They were beneficially owned. And it was not until into the 1960s that those arrangements were dispensed with, and the companies started to fly their own flag. So CMI was a little bit early in that. The CMT, Chinese Maritime Trust, became Chinese Maritime Transportation, and then Atlantic Union Lines, Orient Overseas Lines. These were proudly Chinese flag ships. And I guess that's one other thing to comment on, and those of you here who are ship owners know this very well, of course. The decision had to be made. Do we fly the Hong Kong flag? Do we fly the Taiwan flag? Or do we fly a flag of convenience? And there are arguments for doing each one of those or not doing them. CY was very patriotic in this regard. Well, he was a nationalist. He was a Chinese nationalist. He was not going to fly the British flag. I think he may have done that on one or two early ships, but by about 1951, he'd already decided not to do that. And despite the advantages of Hong Kong flag, and so he was one of the first to use Panamanian and then Liberian registration, particularly for the tankers. That was more bankable. The banks were much happy to lend you money for a Liberian flagship, but I think for a Panamanian flag. But all these things were sorted out over time, and the various Hong Kong owners clearly built their relationships with their banks, and that made them. They had reputation, they were creditworthy. But it was a struggle. There's no question. Through the 50s, it was a struggle.
When would you say that for CY that business and finance became a bit smoother? Because it seems like that the 50s was a real struggle.
Oh, well, so I think by the 70s it was, impression it was settling down, probably in the course of the 60s. I mean, eventually, as I said yesterday, I mean, people coming to see, well, almost asking, can I lend you money? Because he was regarded as such a good risk. But even so, I mean, loans are syndicated, as you know. But then some of the things that he was doing, as I said, in liner shipping were not really bankable propositions. So there's a good deal of cross-subsidy happening, I think, within the group. And of course, OOCL became an independent, through Orient Overseas Container Holdings Limited, as it was originally known, was a separate listed company. And that's quite significant, I think. And so in the 1970s, the Tung Group was one of a number of Hong Kong companies that did set up listed entities. Some survived, some were eventually brought back into the family. So equity capital did become another form fundraising, but only in the 1970s. So it's, yeah.
You know, I haven't met Mr. C.Y. Tong, but I find that someone like him, and we know a lot of other people in Hong Kong who've been very successful, that they are a force of personality, right? I mean, there's something about them. So I always think that when you talked about him having to buy tramplers and so on because it was cheap, and he has to go and, you know, ask the bank to lend him money. None of it was very smooth, right? But it is the force of personality that kind of get you there. What can you tell us about that force that, you know, made people trust him? I mean, in the end, the bank is going to lend you money. People are going to give you equity because they trust you. So tell us something about that.
Well, here I feel at a disadvantage because I'm talking to people who you know each
A few
other.
people here know him.
You know each other better than I do. So, the comments I make will simply be for your amusement, put it like that, and you don't have to take anything seriously. But I have, as I was writing the book, I was always mindful. Yeah, well, I trained originally as an economist, and everyone knows the joke about the two-handed economist. So, on the one hand, I had CY, and on the other hand, I had YK, and I was always mindful of these two men, very different personalities, and yet both coming more or less from Shanghai. And they're very different personalities and approaches to business. Now, I have no doubt that if I was a banker in the room with YK, that I would feel that I was in the presence of a very forceful personality. I don't think there's any, I just sense that YK was definitely of that character. CY, I have a sense, was a much shyer person. I think as a personality, he was more inclined to listen. And clearly, when he got people around the table, which he liked to do, he liked to get people talking. He liked to listen and learn from people and just quietly make up his own mind. Then he has an idea, test it out on people. So in that sense, he was an entrepreneur. But whereas YK would be a kind of us type entrepreneur, I think CY was a quieter and more cautious. And so I think in his case, it was much more about persuasion. Networking, getting to know people, persuasion. But even then, he refers in the diary to times when people would not, he wanted to meet someone, they would not meet him. You know, why should I bother with this man I don't know really anything about? But it was persistence, but something that certainly was important. Maybe that is something worth emphasizing. CY was one of the first people, the Hong Kong shipowners, to make very, very good connections with the Japanese. He had the language from before the war. He was networking with Japanese before the war for the business of the Shenzhen Shipowners Association and Shenzhen Navigation. So he was not disadvantaged in that respect. Now, after the war, something very frustrating happened, and some of you will know the story. CY was expecting, through the Shanghai Shipowners Association, that the private shipowners would get reparations tonnage from the Allied powers because so many ships had been lost. And they didn't. MacArthur said the Japanese ships that have survived the war, I'm going to keep them. I'm going to keep them and use them in Japan. You don't, China. See, I thought we should get those Japanese ships. They didn't. The German ships were handed over to the Allied powers. The Japanese ships were not handed over to China, which was an Allied power. And CY found this just extraordinarily insulting. And recently went to New York in 1948 with two others, was to negotiate ships. They got 3. One was lost, the other 2 had to be handed back. And so eventually China Union Lines did get some tonnage. They got some tonnage. China merchants did quite well. The private ship owners were really, let's be honest, they were cheated. They were cheated after the war. And that held back Chinese liner shipping for more than a decade. So that's another aspect of the problem, that China got no proper war reparations from the Allied powers. They were cheated. China was cheated, and he had to deal with it. No, as I say, it is as it is. Okay, we have to lift ourselves up by our own bootstraps, and they each of the Hong Kong owners in their own different ways found a pathway.
I'm going to open up for question by the audience in a minute, but perhaps I can just ask you another question. You spoke quite lyrically about his love for ships. And there is something special about ships, right? I mean, they usually name after beautiful things, including women's names. And, ships, they can be quite different, right? You're building a ship, you're designing a ship that has some special features. So somehow you indicated that CY fell in love with his ships. Is there something more you can tell us there?
Well, here I'm just, you were inviting me to go on a wander, yeah?
I think that if, unless, how shall I put it? Also, as a little bit of an author myself, if you're writing about something which you didn't go through yourself, right? You about someone else.
Yeah.
You kind of need to put yourself in those situations.
No, I have an answer. I'll put it like this. I've talked to many ship owners over the years. Some, not so many actually in Hong Kong, more in Indonesia and Singapore and Australia, and to some extent in UK and Europe. I find that there's at least 2 kinds. There are those ship owners for whom the ship is a financial asset. Basically, it's something to do with the balance sheet and it's balance sheet and profit and loss. And I suspect, but I can't ask you now, that YK was sort of in that category. I mean, he thought like a bank, I think. And I don't think there was much sentiment in YK's way of doing business, and he was very, very successful. So that's not a criticism. There are other ship owners who really do. Their ships are like their children or something like that. Now, here's a story of how I got involved just wandering as a schoolboy around the docks in Melbourne. I mean, that's where I got into it. But, and that's just another story, but we'll leave it on the side. But when I went to Indonesia, it turned out I wrote a PhD in Indonesia as an economist about the Indonesian enterprise shipping industry. It wasn't my idea, it was my supervisor's idea, but it turned out to be a good one. So how do you go about doing it? Now, as an economist, I couldn't barge in the front door and say, tell me about your profitability and efficiency and this kind of thing, because obviously I wasn't going to get past the secretary. But what did I do when I got to Tanjung Priok in Singapore? I just walked. I walked around the docks. I just looked at the ships and who owned them and what were they loading and what were they unloading. So then when I went and knocked on the door of a ship owner in Jakarta, I introduced myself at the front desk, and I looked a bit strange at this foreigner. Where did he come from? And I explained my interest, and if I'm lucky, I get a meeting with one of the managers or the ship owner himself. Now, if I could say, I was in Tanjung Priok the other day and I saw your ship, the Odessilat or something like that, that's a pretty interesting conversion you did there. And okay, 2-3 hours later, we're still talking. I mean, if with that other kind of ship owner, if you know the ships, then you have a conversation. And of course, it's just the same with ship masters. Well, I know a lot of ship masters, and some of them are close friends. You can talk for hours. Well, you were on such and such, and this happened, and that. So goes on. I mean, you can go on forever. So the one benefit of having that fascination with the ships themselves is it does help you to relate to the people on the ships as well, because they're part of the organization. And one of the things that comes out of the diaries, but more from people who commented on CY and his way of doing things, is how he related to the crews on the ships. He would remember people. He'd stop and talk. And if you were an officer or a seaman, you were not less important than someone who was a banker or something like that. And if you can generate that loyalty from top to bottom of your organization, obviously, and I certainly felt, we are family. It didn't just mean the two family. It meant the whole island OOCL organization. We are family, and people. That's the glue, I think, that held it all together.
I'm just wondering whether there are any. Oh, yes, there are questions. I'll give the first question to the chairman of the Hong Kong Shipowners Association, and then to Sean. Yes.
Sure, thank you very much, Christine. And actually, Howard answered my first question, which was why shipping, very eloquently, and so on. And then you'd also commented that CY had a family to look after, so that was not unrelated. I guess I'm a liner guy by background, I guess, and so I could ask the question again. So why liner? And I was thinking the background is during the 60s, 70s, all these British liner companies are giving up, or at least they're all combining into something called Overseas Container Line or a Cunard competitor and so on. So, but meanwhile, he's going against the grain. He didn't pursue the Shikumasan working power path. So what is it about liner? And you mentioned that there's a bit more profile to it, more prestige to it. Was it purely that?
I would say so. And I was aware of that even as a schoolboy, as I said, walking around the docks in Melbourne or sometimes Sydney. There are a lot of ships made, in those times, war-built ships handling dirty cargoes, but nobody really, you didn't look twice. But it was the big line of companies like P&O, or if you think of Hong Kong, Bay Line, or the Japanese, NYK, OSK, Hapag. These names mean something. Tremendous reputation. They've been doing it for so many decades, and also the beautiful passenger liners before and after the Sino-Japanese War. These were household names around the world. I mean, we knew some. We had some in Australia, and knew there were others that came here. And people knew these ships, the such and such. Oh, you travel on the such and such. It was P&O, or it was Messagerie, or Hapag, or whatever. So my sense was, as a Chinese nationalist, I think, that well, why can't we do this? Why can there not be a Chinese flag ship that is as prestigious and well-run and well-regarded as a British or a French or Japanese one? In other words, that sense that we should have equality on the oceans and not just be having small coasters or South China Sea or carrying coal or something like that. I mean, of course you can do all those things, but why can't I send my ship to Europe or the United States? I think I can understand that he would. Well, then, if you like, join the big boys. Yeah, I want to be with the big boys, something like that.
So talking about
And sorry, can I make one last comment? Apologies. And of course, as we know, it's in the book, in 1980, CY buys the entire Furness Withing Group, one of the top, shall we say, 5 or 6 biggest British shipping groups. He buys the whole thing, lock, stock, and barrel. I mean, at that point, you kind of say game over. I mean, the world has changed. And the British owners were astounded at his chutzpah, if you like, to even think of doing such a thing. But they didn't have any reason. Well, Furness Withing were losing money. They were happy to sell, and nobody else wanted to buy them. So, and the bankers were keen. So there you are, and all the rest is history. But, I mean, that was the moment where suddenly no one from Hong Kong to London could bring in any doubt that the world had changed and was changing very fast. And that was really the first phase of the revolution, going back to that table that brings us to 2026. Sorry, my apologies, but I thought I would add.
No, I was going to ask a question in the same vein. You said that after the war, MacArthur refused to give a few ships to the Chinese to compensate for their losses during the war. Was it because of China? Did he give any ships to, let's say, the Soviet Union, which was also an ally, and any other countries, or he treated everybody equally? He just refused to give ships to anyone.
A very good question. After 1945, the Americans did not give any more ships to the Russians, but the Russians, the Soviets, did not give any ships back. The ships that had been lent to the Soviets were never returned. But the Greeks were given the opportunity to buy ships quite cheaply. The Italians, who after all had been on the other side in the war, were given an opportunity to buy more surplus ships. The Belgians, the French, the British, all of those people got their opportunity, but not China. And I don't think, I mean, you have to look at the USICAS, I don't think that was a decision made in Washington. I think that was a decision made by General MacArthur in Tokyo, who more or less said to Washington, I'm not giving you the ships. Full stop, end of argument. And he wanted to rebuild Japan. I don't think there was a direct fear of China yet. But of course, by 1948-49, that probably was an issue. But it should have been beyond negotiation. In 1946, that China as an allied power would be given surrendered Japanese tonnage. Yeah, they were one of the allied powers, the only one in the far.
This must be one of those little research aspects that
a
this
wonderful topic for a PhD,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yes. But it's of course part of the humiliation of being Chinese at that time. That even though you are officially an allied power, but you are still being treated, it's still an imperial mindset that you can't break. You have to break it by your own efforts, and that's what CY did. I'm not going to put up with this situation. And of course, many other Chinese people were going about it.
I think it was interrupted by the Civil War.
Yeah.
And then, the communists come in 49, so the whole politics changed.
Yeah.
That would be my interpretation.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, the gentleman at the back.
Thank you. My name is Lee. I am from the trade union related to seafarers. And thank you, Mr. Dick, and thank you, the university press. Yes, this will not be a profitable book. Thank you. And also, I'm not sure I have the right tune for asking a question from the trade union point of view. And the honorable speaker mentioned about the flag of convenience when answering the question from this law. And the trade unions are concerned flag of convenience. As the business tech, you introduce a table from the beginning, from the United Nations UNCTAD, the Review of Maritime Transport 2024. And I would like to mention one sentence from this review. This review, they emphasize that seafarers are particularly vulnerable when working on board the ship register as a flag of convenience, as they may be easily at the risk of abandonment. And before come here, I have make a search on the annual report of OOCL in the library, and I found that in the year 2018 and 2019, the group vessels were about 101 in the year 2018, owned and listed. But of the 101 vessels, about 35 are the flag of convenience, not Hong Kong, China flag. And also in 2019, they have about the same figure. In 2019, about 104 vessels owned and leased by the group, and of which about 35 were flag of convenience. And maybe this situation is improving, but it will be welcome if the total flag of convenience will be eliminated in the future in the group's vessels. This is my first remark. And the second one is that also in the annual report of the OOCL, I
We're
find
kind
that
of departing from the book itself. Is it? I know the point you're trying to make.
Yeah.
Well, let's take the first.
Let's take the first one.
Is that
Yes,
okay?
let's take the first one on flags of convenience.
Yeah, I think it's an important issue in this book. It's an important issue for Chinese shipping because one of the issues right from the beginning is that the Chinese merchant flag was not a flag of convenience. It's only for very brief periods that the Chinese flag has been viable. Now, China Merchants was able to fly the Chinese flag, but not during substantial periods of war when the ships had to be flagged out to British and French and Japanese and German flags, and that, of course, had to be done again during the Sino-Japanese War. And then we have all the problems after the Second World War. Of course, the PRC flag itself cannot trade. It was subject to blockade and political controls in various ports. Now, the issue for a ship owner is you want to be able to trade from port A to port B and maybe triangulate and then bring a cargo back from port C. And if you want to do those things, you don't want your ship to be detained. You also want your ship to be insurable, because if the ship is not insurable, it won't be going to sea. So a lot of these decisions do have to be made in the light of accessibility and insurance. That's not the whole story. In liner shipping, it was a different calculus, because in the days when you had liner conferences, to get admission to a conference, you had to have a national flag as British or Japanese. So eventually when C.Y. was applying in the 1960s for admission to the UK-Europe conference, of course, the Trans-Pacific was an open conference under US arrangements. But when he was applying for access to UK-Europe, the only flag he could go under was the Taiwan flag. So his admission to the conference was originally under that flag, but later OOCL is able to fly the Hong Kong flag. So that leads to a different situation. The other comment I make, though, the flag of convenience got out of the bag a long, long time ago. And if we take the Liberian flag, it was American tanker ship owners, particularly just after the Second World War, who developed that as a means of recrewing, avoiding the high cost of US crews and, of course, the US tax arrangements. And it's worth remembering that one of the big guys in setting that up, I'm trying to remember his name, but he was a former Secretary of State, I think, in the 1940s in the US administration. So it was a kind of policy of the US government to do this. So I understand the problem, the point that you're making, and the issue of the welfare of seafarers is a vital one. But it isn't just a flag of convenience problem. It's easy to identify that, I think, as the root of the problem, but I think it is more complex than that. But that's as far as I can go from a historical perspective. I think in other respects it's a matter for the Hong Kong Shipowners Association and the shipowners themselves. But, this issue has been controversial for decades, and it will continue to be. But shipowners have to survive. They have to make money. Their ships have to be insurable, and the ships have to be profitable. Otherwise, everything stops. And
Here's another
there we
fair
are.
point. If it's the same company and some of their ships are flags of convenience, it doesn't mean that they're worse for the seafarers who happen to be working on a ship, that is under a flag of convenience. So whilst I think we understand your point, Mr. Lee, I prefer not to pursue this point any further. Are there any? Yes,
Can I just make one
Yes,
other
please.
comment, though, that I think is interesting and fascinating to me as a matter of irony, that there is a lot of PRC-controlled shipping under flags of convenience. So we know, of course, here, very familiar to you in the room, that companies like Yip Fung,
at the back. There are two hands at the back.
Yip Fung, for example, that was eventually merged into POSCO Hong Kong, was a flag of convenience operation for the People's Republic for many years, and a very successful one. And a lot of PRC-controlled shipping is flag of convenience. So, and a lot of Hong Kong-controlled shipping is flag of convenience. So, as you say, you have to match it with the trades and the arrangements that you have with your bankers. There are all kinds of issues that and insurance that come into play.
There are two hands at the back. So perhaps the first question.
Okay, can I go? All right.
Please, both of you ask the question at the same time.
All right. Just moving on from the flags of convenience, I think the point that's very much worth making and brings it back into the fact that we're here to really talk about C.Y. Tung is the role that ship owners and the soul of an individual ship owner and the ship owning family has and their passion for the business. And that engenders its way all the way through the shipping company to include the crew. And one thing that I've always noticed, and I know, and there's a lot of people in this room, and I know a lot of people in Hong Kong who have worked for the Tung family shipping organizations, and it's the loyalty that was engendered there. And you meet people, and that is always one of the greatest parts of their career when they worked for OOCL or Island Navigation. I mean, I remember being with my friend here in the Foreign Correspondence Club, and we were with an ex-OOCL master. And when he was a cadet, he was in Melbourne on a ship, and his job to walk around the deck. And as he's walking around the deck, he saw this Chinese gentleman standing on the quay looking at the ship. He was very suspicious. And he walked all the way back to the accommodation block. And this gentleman then went up the accommodation ladder. And he said, well, hold on, what are you doing? And he said, I'd like to see the master. And so this young officer said, well, who are you? He said, I'm Mr. C.Y. Tung. and so he was shown to him, and this young ship's officer, he thought, well, that's the end of my career. But as Mr. Tung left, he singled him out and said, well done on calling into question that. And it was this involvement and the passion with everybody who worked for the company. And even in the mid-80s, when the company was having really difficult times, sadly after CY passed, the loyalty of the staff was quite phenomenal. And that ran from people in the office all the way down to the seafarers. So I do think that a really important part of this whole story is the Tung family values that have been passed on to every single person who's worked in that company.
Well said, and I think that is the strength of a family shipping company, as opposed to a rather more anonymous stock-held company. If you are owned simply by an equity fund or something like that, you're in big trouble.
So the next question, please.
Sorry, I just kind of want to go back to that reparation. I think what happened with the reparation is because China had a lot of war debt with the U.S. So that was one issue that didn't get China didn't get the Japanese maybe ships as like for reparation. Also, Hamburg was actually under British occupation, so it's much easier for UK to get the German ships. Where China did not have occupation in Japanese main islands, only in Taiwan, where so China did for China in Taiwan, the Taiwan provincial government now under China actually took the ships under Taiwan navigation. So in that sense, a little bit, but it's not for deep sea shipping ships. Yeah.
I think your point is very well made, but nevertheless, from the perspective of the maritime industry, it was still an inequitable arrangement, and it did impose a penalty for quite some years. But you're absolutely right. Yes, I'm sure that was a consideration.
Hello, Howard. Hi, my name is Lincoln, working in maritime industry for more than 15 years, and good to see you again today. My question is absolutely well connected with your book. It's actually about, are you considering together with Stephen to write another book in connection with the reason why I'm asking about that is I took the whole day to read the full book after purchasing that. I found it's quite interesting, especially on chapter 12, talking about the rise of Chinese maritime merchants. But, there are top 4 Chinese shipping families apparently in Hong Kong, and the relationship between Chinese shipping families and also the Japanese shipping conglomerates like Mizuho, SK, and YK, and why they buy the vessel, why they build the vessel, and charter out to the Japanese. For our maritime insiders, we know some of the strategy, but for the outsiders who have interest, it will be great for them to understand the relationship and also the history. So, yeah, that's why I'm asking if it is possible to have another book. And I think it will be quite valuable, not only for our insiders, but also valuable for all of the people who have interest for the maritime industry. Thank you.
Thank you for the encouragement, but you may have to speak to my wife. She would not be so sympathetic. I think that Stephen and I would hope that our book will encourage other people to, it will give them a base to work from and explore other aspects of the shipping industry, whether specific to Hong Kong or the China sphere more broadly. I mean, it does also relate certainly as far as Singapore and so on. It's so many issues arise. So we will, Steve and I, continue, I hope, to add to our website in more bite-sized pieces. But I think this is, there won't be another book from us, but please, we would be happy to discuss with other people.
You can write shorter papers.
We will write shorter material. But I mean, if it leads to engagement with other potential authors and we can help them, we'd be delighted to do so. I mean, yeah, we get
possible.
Other people will take it from here, I guess.
Yes.
I hope, yes.
Please, Mr. Su.
Actually, going back to the post-war era, I do want to add a bit more color to that period. Actually, sitting next to David Koo, we're talking about our mutual friend Paul Sa, whose father, Y.C. Sa, was the representative of China merchants in Japan during the post-war era. Actually, immediately after the war, China didn't get any of the Japanese ships as reparations. But actually, during the war years, the United States built about 2,700 Liberty ships, these standard 10,000 deadweight vessels. And after the war, they became war surplus. And the United States did sell 10 of them to the then ROC government in Nanjing it wasn't a gift, but it was at preferential financing terms. And the Chinese government organized the China Union Lines. And I believe that it was Mr. C.Y. Tung, one of his trips to the U.S. was to assist in taking delivery of those ships. And eventually, China Union Lines moved with the ROC government to Taipei. And eventually, the Tung family became the major shareholders of the China Union Lines. So that was the post-war. There was some compensation in that regard.
Yes. Yes, there's a question up here. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Dix. You spoke briefly about Mr. Tong's connection with seafarers who worked under him. Can you tell us a bit more about the training of Chinese or Hong Kong seafarers through his company in the 60s and 70s? If you came across any such material during your research. Thank you.
I can't go into a lot of detail on that. It's an aspect that perhaps we should have said a little bit more about. But CY's approach from the very beginning was, I want my ships to be crewed by Chinese, from the masters down to the seafarers. Now, that was not the policy of necessarily of other Hong Kong owners. Now, there was anyway the complication that if you registered your ship in Hong Kong, then you should have a British master on the ship who could be of Chinese, but would need to be a British citizen. But as I said, CY was not intending his ships would sail as British, so they were sailing mostly on Panamanian and Liberian flags. So he could employ from the beginning Chinese masters, not foreign masters. Other companies made different decisions for their own reasons, and it's not for me to comment why they went one way or another. But certainly, we do point out at one point in the book that it was a weakness of China's merchant marine in the interwar years that so few seafarers were being trained to be ship's officers and engineers. And CY did what he could from the 30s onwards. It was something that he flagged to encourage that training. I think one of the academies was at Wusu. Is that correct? So eventually progress was made, but it was rather slow. But he was a trailblazer in this, and I think his officers and masters and engineers appreciated the opportunities that they had for rapid promotion as the fleet expanded. But I don't know enough about how the group handled apprentices and things like that. So that's a more technical aspect for the.
Harriet, may I just make a comment? A small comment. Just a small comment. I think it's on. Anyway, I think the most important thing about my father-in-law, C.Y. Tung, was he was immensely proud to be Chinese. He was always proud of China, and he didn't care which political situation China was at the moment, but he was always very proud to be a Chinese person. And it resonated with me because I grew up in the United States, and of course, the United States is a wonderful country, but there is, as you know, discrimination everywhere. So as a Chinese American, in my early years, sometimes I would be the only Chinese person in my class. And I was very annoyed because people always wanted to know, oh, what is it like to be a Chinese person? What is it like to have Chinese food? And I said, I don't know. I grew up in America. I'm an American. So in that respect, I think Father had a very good balance. That he was very proud to be Chinese, but on the other hand, he knew he had to work on the international stage. So he was actually, I think, in my opinion, rather modest. And he always taught his family to be modest and not showy or, trying to draw attention to ourselves. And as a Chinese American, because my father was the first Chinese graduate of West Point, the United States military at West Point. And so, we always felt that we had to uphold a higher standard because we were always guests in America. My grandfather always said, you are visitors to this country. You are not born American. You are Chinese American. And so I expect all my family to be very respectful of the country, your host country, to adapt, to the customs and mannerisms of your country, language, etc., but always respect your Chinese heritage. And so that's one thing that resonates with me and what I've tried to do with my own family. I said we should always be very proud to be Chinese, even though we grew up in a different country. And some of the moral standards set by Confucius and all the great Chinese philosophers have always been instilled to all of us, even to this very generation, my children's generation. So I would just say that I think CY, my father-in-law, actually was a modest person. He never tried to show off or to, talk about all his exploits and accomplishments, but he was always very proud to be a Chinese too. And so I think, in a way, all of us, whether we're from China or Europe, we have to respect our backgrounds. Even though we may not agree with everything in our backgrounds, we should be proud of our heritage. All of us. Thank you.
Thank you. There's something I think special about the Shanghai people who came to Hong Kong. So maybe as a closing question, in Hong Kong, we kind of hosted this rather large Shanghai community that ended up here, and shipping was one of the key businesses that they built here. I mean, in looking back, and now looking at your chart, the Shanghai shipowners and the shipping community here really built something amazing here as shipowners. And they may have chartered their ships to others, but basically they created Chinese shipowning in Hong Kong and everything that went with it. And during that era, there were many of them. As you said, right? There was Mr. Tung, there was Mr. Pao, there was Mr. Chao, there was Mr. Ku. I mean, there's several families who really did a lot. Again, from your research, what was it like at the time? I mean, for Hong Kong to be hosting this incredible period that built Hong Kong's really as a bit of a shipping empire in the private sector.
We were helped tremendously. I mentioned it earlier to Sandy by having Stephanie Zara write that book about the Hong Kong Shipowners Association, which of course give a lot of consideration to that aspect, because there are so many of those families, and you mentioned some, but of course there are others too. And it's intrigued me, and I can't say that I have much that I could add really to what Stephanie has already said. But I'll make a point in a different way. Most of the ship owners in Southeast Asia that I have met over the years, in Indonesia, especially in Singapore, are Hokkien. They're not. There is, as far as I know, no Shanghai, although I see Pacific International Lines did come from Quemoy. So I guess it's not so far. It's not so far away. And he's mentioned in the book too. But it's the Hokkien and in the Philippines as well, from Amoy particularly, is Xiamen. So it's a different group. And the same issue arises why that group of course there are Cantonese ship owners and ship owners and so on, but there is I think it's partly a network thing. I mean, there is a certain amount of economic theory of networks and information flows. And there's also, of course, the financial aspect of it as well. So if you are in a group of people who thinks in a particular way and does business in a particular way, then that does make it easier for other people in that group. And the sort of thing you will see that happens, of course, is that sometimes, as in the Cook family, there is a separation and one business becomes two businesses, for example. Or sometimes someone who's hired into a business, like YC Chambers at International Lines is hired in, he becomes general manager of Key Hawk, and then in 1967 he goes off and sets up his own company. I could give many other examples of that kind of thing happening, and I'm sure you know of other examples as well. So it somehow there is a talent school. I think that's part of it. I mean, you somehow or other you have to learn the business. It's a difficult business. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to go into shipping, buy a ship, and you're going to make money. I mean, sometimes if the market's in your favor, you might, but you probably won't survive for very long. So it's a tough school. You really have to learn how to do it properly, one way or another. So if you're in a group that's talking to each other, interacting, intermarrying, which is not important, then you get certain advantages. But in the end, if you want to, well, here's the last thing, perhaps. The world can count hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of aspiring ship owners who didn't last very long. But they lost money, and they were too speculative, or their timing was wrong, or something else happened. To survive in this industry, you have to take risks. If you don't take risks, you won't be there in another 10 years' time. But you have to take cautious, calculated risks, and that's what we see CY doing. And it's not an easy book, I don't think, this one to read, particularly if people who aren't so interested in shipping. There's a lot of decisions about buying a particular ship and using a ship in a particular way. But that's how you build the business, piece by piece. How do you climb steps? You go one step, the next step. You do it step by step. You don't jump from the bottom up to the top. So we did try to show the what they call iterative decision making, how you progress. So cautious risk taking as opposed to speculative. And everyone knows the carrion example. We don't even mention that. So if you're in a group of people who's good at cautious risk taking, that's a good environment in which to learn a particular business. Yeah.
Well, Howard, I think there is not a book of this massive size. We know there are some short papers that you could still produce and be very interesting to Hong Kong. And I think we're very lucky to be in Hong Kong. I mean, we have tremendous family businesses, long held, with British background, Shanghai background, Indian background. I mean, everybody is mixing here. We have a tremendous maritime business here. So just thank you so much for coming. And thank you to Hong Kong U and the Tung family for supporting this. I understand they have some water and cookies for us. So please feel free to stay and talk to the author. And please feel free to network, because I know some of you are from the shipping sector, but some of you have come because I think they want to know more about the shipping sector. So thank you very much. Please thank our author.
I would like to do one last thing. I would like to thank you, because it's such a privilege to speak in front of this audience. If you think I've got something wrong or not quite right, please tell me. But could I just thank you as an audience? So I'm going to clap you.